Hi, my name's Jamie, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Powhatan's social structure. So when I use the term Powhatan Indians, what I am actually referring to is a chiefdom of about 30 or so different tribes that lived in the eastern part of Virginia. Virginia in the late 16th and early 17th century had a lot of different types of tribes living here. They were a part of a lot of different language groups as well. We had Siouan-speaking tribes to the south and west. We had Iroquoian-speaking tribes to the west. And along the Tidewater part of Virginia, which kind of runs in line with the line of about Richmond over to the Chesapeake Bay, we had a lot of Algonquian-speaking tribes as well, Eastern Algonquian specifically. And a lot of those Eastern Algonquian tribes had formed themselves into a chiefdom in the late 16th century and into the early 17th century, around the time the English come and settle Jamestown. And the person who was in charge of this chiefdom was Powhatan. Powhatan was his title. His actual name was Seneca, but he took the title Powhatan because he had actually inherited the rule of 6 tribes from his mother. The Powhatan were a matrilineal society, which means that your status and your family affiliation always passes through the women's line. Political power is usually held by men, but if there's no men in a woman's line to take over, then women take over as well. So he had inherited those from his mother, and because they had tribes that were considered unfriendly or perhaps enemies surrounding him, was likely a catalyst to him forming this chiefdom. So through coercion, warfare, diplomatic moves like intermarriages, he had amassed a chiefdom of over 30 tribes in addition to his 6 tribes as well. So they had formed themselves into a chiefdom, and there was a lot of different social stratification in this chiefdom. So you could look at Powhatan a little bit like an emperor, and in that he was overseeing several what would be similar to like a kingdom or a nation. So he was the high chief. The mamanatowick was another title for him, which basically is a title for a high chief, which the English, when they come over, translate into a term, something like a high king or an emperor. And under him, those 30 some odd tribes each had their own chief as well. Their word for chief is werowance. If it's a female chief, it's a werowansquas. So mostly male chiefs, werowances, but there were a few werowansquas in there as well. So they would be considered like kings of nations that were in an empire. So those chiefs had complete control, complete authority over the people in their own nations, their own tribes. But within each of those tribes and nations, they had roughly a general territory that would be considered their home territory. And within that territory, there would be a number of different towns, villages, hamlets of different sizes. Could be as few as 5 to 10 families to up to, maybe close to 100 families in these towns, depending on the size and the resources in the area. So each of one of these subgroups, these towns within that nation, would also have a werowance. So we have 2 different levels of chief who are all under Chief Powhatan and all report to him, as well as the high chief. So these chiefs would oversee the day-to-day operations. We could call them town chiefs, just for ease of speaking's sake. And they would be in charge of the day-to-day operations of the tribe. They would be in charge of collecting tribute as well. So I'm sure all of the modern people watching are familiar with paying taxes. Powhatan would also have to pay taxes, and this would be basically goods that were collected at least once a year, if not more. So whatever they're producing, women in Powhatan society are farmers, and they gather and they produce a lot of goods. So a portion of what they're producing throughout the year would be given as tribute. Same with the men. So the men are the hunters and they're fishers. They trade with other tribes. So everything, and again, they make goods as well. So everything that they produce, part of that would be given to their town chief. Their town chief would then present all of that tribute up to their district chief or nation chief. The nation chief would offer it up back up to Powhatan, so the taxes are climbing up the system. Powhatan would pick what he wanted out of this, and then he would do what's called limited redistribution. So some of that would go back down again. So he would let the district chiefs and the town chiefs kind of keep their cut of the tribute as well. And he would use the tribute that he collected, all those taxes and goods, as incentive. So the men and women who did special favors for any of the werowances, the chiefs, the town chiefs, the district chiefs, or Powhatan, if they did things like maybe look after a field, especially for him, for his own use, or if warriors would willingly go to war when they went to war with other tribes, they would get goods. So they would get part of that tribute. So the tribute did kind of trickle back down the chain as well. Most of the people living in the town would be considered commoners, you know, something that people, just average everyday people. There are, you know, what the English will term when they're writing about the Powhatan, the better sort. So obviously some who are better at producing goods may live a little bit nicer, or if they have the favor of their chief, they may live a little bit nicer. So there would be some people who would be considered poor within the towns as well, who may not have as much because they're either not as good at producing it or they don't have favor. Within this social structure system, there is also religious leaders. So just like religious leaders are seen in different nations all over the world today, historically for the Powhatan, religious leaders played a big part in all of these towns and in these districts and nations, and for Chief Powhatan as well. So religion is often tied into everybody's daily life, so they would have a few levels of religious leaders as well, and the English would label them either as priests or conjurers. So the priests seem to be the ones who were strictly the conduit between people and the gods that they believed in and worshipped. And the conjurers were more of healers. So they would be in charge of medicine, and when people got sick, you would go see the conjurers. And because their religion was so tied up into daily life, the priest had a lot of respect. So when it came to things like a chief looking for counsel, he would have a few people he would rely on. So when he's making important decisions, or she is making important decisions, they would often gather up their counselors, which could either be men who were very accomplished in warfare, or it could be their most trusted chiefs, priests and advisors as well. So anyone that he went to for advice would be considered part of the council, and that would make you kind of part of the upper class in a town as well. The Powhatan society was structured very similar to European society, to a lot of Asian societies, to societies really you see all over the world. There's always a little bit of social stratification. It's very rare in a society you see people who are always operating at the same level. So you would have people, obviously the werowances and the chiefs and the priests would be considered a little wealthier, and some of the regular people living in the towns would be considered of a higher status because of their relationship with the chiefs. So that's a little bit about the Powhatan social structure. If you have any other questions or comments about them, please leave them in our comments below, and make sure that you like and subscribe to our channel. And we appreciate you viewing. Thank you.